Okay, so I made a video. I'm gonna make this video a little bit quicker. I pre-did the questions, so if you have questions after we go over them, you could pause, look at what I did, or obviously reach out to me or your teacher to get help. All right, so the first three questions, page one, multiple choice. So number one says, what value of z satisfies the equation above? So solving the equation, subtract z from both sides. You get z plus 1 equals 0, subtract 1, you get z equals -1. You could plug it in and check, but that would be the answer. Number two, so the television with a price of $300 is to be purchased with an initial payment of $60 and weekly payments of $30. Which of the following equations can be used to find the number of weekly payments required to complete the purchase, assuming there are no taxes or fees? So again, it's going to cost you $300 total. You put $60 down, and then it's $30 every week, so that would be C. All right, number three, shipping charges. You got table above shows shipping charges for an online retailer that sells sporting goods. This was a little bit tricky. So looking at this, I chose to figure out like the slope approximately. This is a no calculator test, so you obviously don't want to be plugging these decimals trying to do that work with that. So I rounded and said that this point was equivalent to, say, 10, 22, so x coordinate, y coordinate, 20, 32 for this one. And then I found the slope between those points was 1, right? So that tells me, like, if I'm thinking about an equation in y equals mx plus b form, remember y equals mx plus b, you know that the slope is right here. I know the slope is 1. So you're like, I'm kind of torn at this point between A and B, right? So you're like, well, which one is it? And this is where if I look at any of the choices, if I plug in 5, let's say 5 for the pounds, it's not going to tell you the shipping charge. 5 times 99 cents is about $5. This shipping charge is about $16.95. So you got to have that additional amount. That's like that probably like standard fee to ship anything, and then it's going to cost you a little bit more. So it's going to be B for that one. Number 4 here, you got a graph that tells you in the paragraph, it tells you what that graph represents. So based off what it says in the paragraph, we know the x-axis is the base diameter of a cylindrical Doric column, and then the y-axis is the height. So doesn't, the cylindrical Doric column, I don't know, what that even is. I guess it's probably like something like the Parthenon or something. But anyways, this is how much greater is the height of a Doric column that has a base diameter of 5 feet than the height of a Doric column that has a base diameter of 2 feet. So I employed a strategy which is just organizing in a table. So I chose to make one column base diameter and then the other column the height. So if the base diameter was 5, I could see that corresponds to a height of 35. So that's what I wrote here. And if the base diameter was 2, that corresponds to a height of 14. So you got the difference between the height versus the base diameter is going to be 35 minus 14, or 21 feet. All right, number 5 down here is a simple, pretty straightforward math question. It says, which of the following is equivalent to the given expression? So you square root 9x squared, and then you break it. I just broke it up. Square root of 9 is 3. Square root of x squared is x. So 3x is your answer. Pretty easy one. If you know what you're doing with the square roots, no calculator again, it's a little bit tricky there. This one says, what values of x satisfy the equation above? This is a little bit tricky, but not too bad, because when I solve the equation, so solving the equation, you multiply both sides by x minus 1. That left me with x squared, and I got -2. Distribute x minus 1, you get -2x plus 2, sorry. I'm going to bring everything over to the same side. That gives me this quadratic equation. It's pretty easy to factor. You factor it by saying what multiplies to -3 but adds to 2, and that would be +3 and -1. So then you go ahead and you say, okay, well, what are the answers then? It's going to be -3 and +1. However, +1, if you plug it in, it gives you 0 in the denominator, which means it's extraneous. So C is one answer, but if it's at -3 and 1, that could have been a pretty tricky question, but it's -1, so you're like, something's up. But the answer is just -3A. All right, number 7, this is a pretty easy one again. It just says, what is f of 0? So f of 0 is essentially asking this question, what does y equal when x equals 0? And the answer to that would be 4. All right, on to number 8. This is the first geometry question we've seen. In the figure above, point B lies on AD. What is the value of 3x? So you can see from here, if this is 90, then these three angles together are 90. They're all going to the sum of the 3 is 90, so 5x equals 90, x equals 18. 3x would be 3 times 18, it's just 54. So quick one there. Number 9 is it gives you a graph, and it says, which of the following is the equation? And then you look at these and you're like, dang it, none of them are in slope-intercept form. but it's okay. So you'd say like, well, what is the slope-intercept form? Well, I see my y-intercept right here is -4 and my slope is -1. So I'm rise 1 over 1. So I can come up with my equation in slope-intercept form pretty easily. And then it's just a matter of converting that into standard. Really simple. You just add x to both sides. And that's what I did right here. Add x, you get x plus y equals -4, which means the answer would be C. All right, on to number 10. The graph consists of the first quadratic equation. The graph consists of 2x squared, y equals 2x squared plus 10x plus 12 is shown. The graph crosses the y-axis at the point 0k. So this is kind of what is your y-intercept? So to remember, you go back to algebra 1 or maybe algebra 2. The y-intercept is the point where x equals 0. So therefore, to find that value of k, you just plug in 0 where you see x into the equation. What that does is that makes these things go away, right? 0 times anything is 0. So it ends up giving you 12. So the y-intercept is 12. So that's a pretty quick one if you remember y-intercepts. Number 11 is every SAT is going to have a circle, whether it's on the calculator or the no calc. You can expect out of the 58 questions, you're going to see something with circles. This is actually a pretty easy one in that realm, but this is the formula. Let me put a box around it or highlight it. But if the center of the circle is HK and the radius is R, the equation for a circle is right here. So you don't put this in your memory bank if you want to store it in your calculator or whatever. Obviously, this is a no calculator, so you kind of just got to remember it. But, we did this in algebra. I know you do this in geometry for sure, but so if you've seen it in other classes. But then again, it's got to go in x minus 5, y minus 7. So that's going to be that. So you can kind of think about like, well, it's got to go in opposite. If you remember that, you're like between A and C, and then it's radius squared. So it's going to be A. All right. Number 12 is your first trig question. So this is kind of a good one. It's kind of like trig in combination with geometry. But it says ABC is similar to DEF. Well, what that tells you, if you know something about similar triangles, their angles are congruent. So what that tells you then is this angle B is congruent to angle E. So they ask you, what is the cosine of angle E? So what I just wrote here is that's the same as the cosine of B. So I'm just going to look at the triangle here, this triangle, and I'm going to figure out what angle the cosine of angle B is. And then in order to do that, I need to remember my cosine, SOHCAHTOA. Cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse. In looking at angle B, the adjacent side is 12, the hypotenuse is 13, so my answer should be 12/13. So again, not too bad. The trig that you're going to see on the SAT is very basic level, so just so you're aware, it's SOHCAHTOA geometry level trig. All right, number 13, in the xy plane, the graph of the function f of x equals x squared plus 5x plus 4 has two x-intercepts. What is the distance between the x-intercepts? It's a good question. So the first thing I got to figure out is what are the x-intercepts? So we've seen a couple problems where you had to factor, but this is the first one. They call them x-intercepts, but really you're finding the same thing. Like the points where the graph crosses the x-axis, called x-intercepts, we call them zeros. But in order to do that, I factored x squared plus 5x plus 4. Again, to do that, you say what multiplies the 4 but adds the 5. Pretty basic, 4 and 1. So then I say, well, -4 and -1 are my x-intercepts. So I put those on the graph and I say, well, what is the distance between those? It's a simple subtraction, right? So -4 minus 1, the absolute value is 3. So that's a good one. Kind of using a lot of skills, understanding that when you factor, you're actually finding the points where the parabola will cross the x-axis. So if I was to graph this parabola, I didn't put it in there, but it would look something like that, where it hits those points right there. So the distance between those is just 3. All right, number 14, what are the values that satisfy the given equation? Again, we got some extraneous situations going on here. So this is something to consider. When we do this one, again, it has the distracting answer, so let's talk about it. So in order to solve this, there's a little bit of work involved here, but you can always work backwards, right? And then we'll talk about that in a second, but I chose to just solve it. So square root of 4x squared is 4x, x minus 3 squared is x squared, minus 6x plus 9, subtract 4x, I get x squared minus 10x plus 9 equals 0, so then I say, well, multiplies to 9, but adds to -10, and that's -1 and -9. If I'm going too fast and you're like, I don't remember how to do that, there's probably videos out there, but I'm kind of going through this assuming we know how to factor. If you don't know how to factor, this problem's going to be very, very difficult. But anyways, you get x is 1 and 9, and you're saying, okay, well, 1 is extraneous because if I plug in 1, I get 2 equals -2, which doesn't matter. If I square root 4, I shouldn't get a negative. So 1 is extraneous, making 9 the only legitimate answer. You could have worked backwards, and it's the first time I'm talking about this, but work backwards means plug in the answers. So what I'm saying by work backward is say like, well, let's try 1. They give you 2 possible answers. Let's try 1. So square root of 4 times 1 equals 1 minus 3. And this is actually a pretty easy one to work backwards on. And I could see, nope, that's not one of my answers. So continuing through that problem, I could do the same thing with 9. So that's 4 times 9 equals 9 minus 3. So that's square root of 36 equals 6. 6 equals 6. So that's a yes. So I would say the answer is 9 only. This is, again, a different strategy for that same question if you had trouble solving it straight away. All right, number 15. This is a good one. Again, it's a tricky one, but it says the system of equations above A is a constant. For which value does the system have no solution? So the key thing there is, what does a system that has no solution look like? And that's when a system has no solution, all x's and y's cancel, and you end up with a false statement, meaning like I get like 5 equals negative 8 or something. That's not true. So in order to make that happen, I looked at, well, I got to make the y, in order for every x and y to cancel, I got to make these y's opposite. So I chose to multiply the top equation by negative 2. That gave me negative 2 times negative 3 is 6. Negative 2 times y is negative 2y, and negative 2 times 6 is negative 12. The bottom equation I didn't touch, but now I'm looking at this and I'm like, well, yeah, negative 2y plus 2y cancels to make 0. And then I need 6x and ax to cancel. So in order for that to happen, I need a basically to be negative 6. I showed the math here, but you could just look at this and be like, what does a have to be right now? And that would be negative 6. 15 right here, you're like, man, that's a tricky question. I agree. Don't assume 16 is harder. I know the test gets progressively harder through the multiple choice, but it's... So that was the extent of the multiple choice. The next questions are grid-in, and one of the things I always want you guys to note about the grid-ins is they start over in relative difficulty. So if you had a hard time with number 4, sort of starts over when you get to these. So number 16, and again, it's sort of. I'm not saying always. Right? This 16 is kind of tricky, right? So this one gives you some information here. It says a manufacturer shipped units of a certain product to 2 locations. The equation above shows the total shipping cost in dollars for shipping C units to the closer location and F units to the farther location. If the total shipping cost was $47,000 and 3,000 units were shipped to the farther location, how many units were shipped to the closer location? So this is a solve for C problem. It's kind of tricky again. If I shipped 3,000 to the further location, I plug it in. The total cost was $47,000. The rest of this problem is I'm solving an equation. I don't have a calculator though, so that's the tricky part about this one. I would say if I had a calculator, this problem's pretty dang easy, but without the calculator, you might have a little bit of issue. But anyway, you subtract 36,000, you get 11,000 equals 5C. 11,000 divided by 5 is C, and that's 22,000. And now you're like, how did you do that? Well, I showed the work over here with long division. All right, moving into number 17, this is an absolute value equation. So with the absolute value equations, there's always 2 solutions. So in this question, it says A and B are the solutions. So it kind of gives you that information and says, what is the value of the absolute value of A minus B? So if the absolute value of 2x plus 1 equals 5, then I know that 2x plus 1 could equal 5, and 2x plus 1 can equal negative 5. So there's 2 different answers to this problem. So the answer, when you set it equal to 5 is 2, when you set it equal to negative 5 is negative 3. Obviously with this, pause if you need to look at that. And then you subtract, and the absolute value, again, 2 minus negative 3 is 5. Negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. Absolute value is 5 either way, so my answer should be 5 for that problem. All right, number 18 is kind of a tricky one. So looking at this one, it says Juan purchased an antique that had a value of $200 at the time of purchase. Each year, the value of the antique is estimated to increase 10% over its value the previous year. The estimated value of the antique in dollars 2 years after the purchase can be represented by the expression 200 times A, where A is a constant. What is the value of A? So a 10% increase is taking the value, which is 200, times 1.1, or times 1 plus 10%, or 1 time plus 0.1. That's what I did here. So that's where like the first year is going to be 200 times 1.1. The second year is going to be 200 times 1.1, and then times 1.1 again. So therefore, that A value ends up just being 1.1 times 1.1. So this is, you could do it with multiplication. I chose it, and I could have cut off the zeros. It probably would have been easier to multiply, but 1.21 is your answer again. And no calculator test, not the easiest thing in the world, but it is doable. 1.1 times 1.1, 11 times 11. So again, if you think about 1.1 times 1.1, you can think about 11 times 11. You might already know that one as a math fact. It's 121, and then there's 2 decimals. So you always say like, okay, there's what I mean by that is one value past the decimal place there, 1 value past the decimal place here, and then So what I mean is one value here, and then you move the decimal 2 places, so 1.21. All right, last question. Or no, sorry, second to last question. 19. This is kind of a trick question. You might spend a lot of time solving this system, but if you just apply that elimination property, it asks you, based on the system of equations, what is the value of 5x plus 5y? So you could find x, you could find y, plug it in and find 5x plus 5y. However, simply looking at this, if I add these straight down, right? So it's gonna, if you did this one and you took a long time, you might be laughing, but you add straight down, you get 5x plus 5y equals 2500, and that is a valid way to do that problem. Sort of just like when you do elimination, it's the same idea. Number 20, similarly, there's a trick to it. So you factor u squared minus t squared. So that's u plus t, u minus t. So when I get this, it ends up being u minus t times u plus t times u minus t, and it gives you what u plus t and u minus t are. So I just highlighted u minus t and u plus t, and u minus t is 2. U plus t is 5. You multiply 2 times 5 times 2 is 20. So hopefully this helps. Like I said, I went through this quickly because they were pre-done. Pause, look at my work. If you got questions, feel free to reach out.